everybody. Welcome to our first webinar of 2022 for the Catholic Prison Ministry Coalition. Today, we're really proud to present the fruit of many, many months of work that the Education Committee of the Catholic Prison Ministry Coalition has been working on. And this is a faith and incarceration Lenten series called Who Do You Say That I Am? It's something that can be used in parishes or in jails or in prisons. And we're going to go through it step by step by the members of our committee. And so first we'd like to start with a prayer, and then I will turn it over to Jared and he will introduce our panelists today. So just pray along with me quietly. Good and loving God, our source of love and light, thank you for bringing us together today in a spirit of generosity. May we honor one another by keeping an open mind. May we voice our truth and listen with an open heart. May we discern your will to unite in fruitful outcome. We ask for your wisdom and grace to use our talents for the betterment of others. With gratitude, we offer this prayer in your name. Amen. So Jared, would you like to introduce everyone for us?
Great. Thank you, Father George, for the opening prayer and for introducing today's webinar. Before we dive into the members of the Education Committee, I'd like to just give you a sense of the roadmap for our conversation today, as well as how this resource came to be. So with that, first, I'd like to name the methodology that we're talking about here and the goals of this packet, of this resource. So this is a guide intended to put together in conversation our faith and incarceration, to engage people in parishes, nonprofits, schools, universities, prisons or jails, various avenues and locations to bring people into the conversation about faith and incarceration. And so with that, show you, it's based on the See, Discern, Act model. Is sort of the methodology behind this resource. You'll see that baked in to each of the activities and the reflections to guide people through a very intentional process to try and see in their own local communities where they could attend to the needs of those who are affected by incarceration. How can we best serve those who have been too often marginalized, and how can we recenter those margins as people of faith and respond to those needs? And additionally, this resource is based to a large extent on the USCCB document, Responsibility, Rehabilitation, and Restoration. It's a 2001 document written by the bishops in response to incarceration and what our Catholic faith offers us in response to that. So looking at the roadmap and an introduction for today, first, I want to be sure that we name that this product, this resource, is product of a coalition. So CPMC, one of our primary goals and part and parcel to our mission is lifting up the work of our partners, lifting up the work of the many ministries around this country who are doing the work of serving those affected by incarceration. So a lot of the resources, the tools, and the reflections you'll find in this guide come directly from members of our coalition. And it's pretty powerful to see all of these pieces coming together in one space to have this robust resource. So something to note from a facilitator standpoint on this, I'll pop up another screen here for a moment, just to show you inside the packet itself, you'll find the letter to the facilitator. So in this letter, it gives you a little bit of an introduction to the packet. If you haven't already downloaded it, you'll find it in there yourself. And on the second part of the letter, there are just some questions to think about, things that'll help you guide you in trying to plan out and understand, all right, how can I implement this resource, these sessions in my own community? How can I engage with this material in the most impactful way for where I am? And if you're asking yourself, well, heck, we can't meet in person, we can only meet virtually, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. A member from our committee will speak to those needs. Something else to keep in mind from a facilitator's perspective is the PowerPoint that you can download for the facilitator and the participant's perspective or participants packet go hand in hand. They're two distinct but needed resources for the facilitator, whereas for participants, they really only need the packet itself, whether that's in digital or in paper format. Whatever medium is best for your situation will work there. let's see, going back to the PowerPoint. Okay. And as we go through our discussion today, a question we'd really value for you to have in the back of your head is, what do you need to implement this resource? How could you what is it that CPMC can do to help you make this applicable to your location, to your local, to your community? So kind of keep that in the back of your mind. And if you have a question or a thought, please feel free to pop it in the chat as we go so that we can capture those questions, and we'll come to those at the end. Or if there's something that's very time sensitive or specific, Father George will help interject with us in the conversation there to make sure we respond to those questions as well. Something that's really neat about this resource is the artwork that's throughout the packet. So there are two pieces of art in particular that are featured in here. There's one by a gentleman named Mark Lauge, and his artwork makes up the front cover and the inside cover of this packet. So Mark is a gentleman who is incarcerated, and his art focuses around sketching portraits of men who are incarcerated in the facility where he is at. And he does this with the intention of shedding some dignity and recognizing the dignity of the men that he is incarcerated with. Oftentimes we see in the media, or we get snapshots of people in undignified ways, right? When we talk about those who are affected by incarceration. But his idea is that if you're asking someone to sit for a portrait, it's a very dignified thing. That's something that can help men reclaim their dignity. And they often share these images with their families. They send them back to their families so that they can see those things. Secondly, there's Stations of the Cross throughout the packet as well, by a gentleman named Derek Quintero and his associates who are on death row in Tennessee. Now, sadly, Derek passed away this past spring from cancer while on death row, but he and a number of his fellow incarcerees, his fellow men, created this art of Stations of the Cross in a very intentional way. And you can find the descriptions of all these pieces of art in the packet itself as well. It talks about that. Secondly, of course, surveys are important to all the work that we do to help respond to your needs as ministers, as chaplains and volunteers. You'll find surveys throughout the packet in the PowerPoint that we would find valuable for you to offer to those who are partaking in the sessions that you're leading, so that we can gain insight on how we can best help you and help the faithful understand incarceration and the faith and what our faith calls us to in response to that. And you'll see those in QR code format on the PowerPoint. So someone should be able to just scan it with their smartphone and it'll pop up on their phone and they can answer right on board there. So now we'll go into a brief overview of what is in each session and how the sessions are formatted, rather. So the communal structure for each of the sessions. So each one will obviously open up with a prayer and then a welcome, an introduction to the space, and we'll set up, there's some language in the facilitator's PowerPoint on how to set up shared expectations, like ground rules for the group, so that we can all better understand where each of us are coming from, and we can agree on norms for the sessions. Your groups can agree on the norms for how you're going to talk about things, when to talk, raise your hand, using flip charts, all those sorts of pieces that might help guide and make a smooth process. So there's notes for those pieces in the PowerPoint section for the facilitator, in the notes section for the facilitator. And then of course, each session will lay out a roadmap and a recap of what's to come, or what we've already talked about. And then there's your first QR code. That is a pre-session survey. You can just scan that and it'll pop right up and you'll be able to garner, or you'll be able to input some feedback there. In each session, after we go through all the content, ends with some resources and calls to action. Now, in the packet itself, at the end of each session, there's a robust list of ways to engage and interact with issues of incarceration and faith. Be that through some of our partner agencies, be that through CPMC's website, or calls to legislative action. It runs the gamut of ways people can get involved, from maybe getting involved at home on your computer, or going out and having direct service to those affected by incarceration is really important. And then there's always a looking ahead section as well at the end of each session, so that people can know what's going to happen, what they can look forward to next time, what's going to be covered, and a space for you to name any housekeeping needs that you have for your local area. And then I'll close in a short prayer. And now I'd like to pass it off to Erica Cohen-Moore, Executive Director for National Association of Catholic Chaplains. And she's going to speak to you briefly about how to do an online format for these sessions. Erica?
Great, thanks, Jared. Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you're at. So I know many of you are very familiar with running online meetings because now we've been doing it for a couple of years, and each of you will have a different format. Some of you do Teams, some of you use Zoom, whatever format it may be. But one of the things we encourage people to do when they're doing online sessions, so you can do this in person, it's just whether you choose to do it online because of COVID, whatever the reason, or you want to make more people accessible, whatever it may be. But when you do online formats, we do run them differently than we do in-person meetings. Online format, you just have to be tighter, and it has to be really organized, and it's less gaps in time. So the schedule has to be very tight. So even though we have a very set schedule, just be very aware of even making it tighter when you do it online. So as adult learners, they've learned that we have about 8 minutes of attention span online, and then we need a distraction. And so you would cover, and each session is different, and so you will do it differently. But if it's heavy content, then I would do it for about 8 minutes, and then interject with some type of, whether it be, Zoom has wonderful features, so you could use their survey, because we actually built into some surveys. Breakout rooms will be very useful, and using the whiteboard is a wonderful to break up time and space to give people a different visual to look at. And then we have some YouTube videos that we've integrated into the different sessions, and really encouraging to use those if you do the online format, because it just gives people, it breaks up their time and space. And so just to be aware of that when you're doing on the online format. And if you have any questions about how to use these different formats, you can go onto YouTube and it'll show you how to use the different platforms, whether you're using Zoom or Team, etc. So, okay, back to you, Jared.
Great, thank you, Erica, appreciate that. And now I'm gonna pass it off to two other members of our team, Harry and Bill. They're gonna walk you through a brief snippet of session 1 for the packet. And they'll show you what's in there and what you can expect exercises wise, and they'll lead us through that. So Harry, Bill, I'll pass it on off to you.
All right, thank you. When we pulled the data together, we emphasize the headlines to the story. And so we encourage you to go deeper into the resources referenced in the guide. All of the references have a live link to the deeper resources which we use for the data. So, but as you review the data, you're going to learn about just how many are incarcerated in the U.S., who is being incarcerated, and much more. But in particular, could you change the slide now? What are the losses of those who are incarcerated? Often the loss of current and future wealth, but there was poverty and homelessness, job possibilities, and most importantly for us, as we did this, families are broken apart, causing great trauma and loss. So we didn't just want to look at figures and numbers. We wanted to look at the number of the issues that these parents and children face in their lives, in school, at home, and in the community. And if you look to your guide, you'll see this section is page 19 to 16 in the participant guide. Bill, could you share a little more about how we tried to shift the focus from data to people?
Yeah, thanks, Harry. What our concern was that once we take a look at the data, it just becomes cold numbers, and we don't have a good understanding for that. So what we wanted to do was take a look at how we could really connect with what the families might be going through. So we came into a number of resources, and you got the ability to go to those resources, and you'll see a lot more details on how people are affected by this. How the kids go through certain issues at school, how different age groups are affected differently. So what we wanted to do was come up with some ways that we could have people talk about what's going on. So we put together a series of scenarios. And the ideas of scenarios is that we could get a sense on what people go through. It gives us a sense on, if I was in that position, what would I feel? So the kind of questions we want to ask is, what do I feel when I'm engaged in this scenario? What images come to mind? And that type of thing. So we came across several scenarios, just putting us to the place of either a family where the father's goes off to jail. So there's a mother who's involved. There's a small child who's involved. You can also have a scenario where it's an older parents and their 50-year-old son who's married with children goes off to prison, and how that affects everybody within that family. The interesting thing about it as we walk through these is that you get a different sense on how different people in different ages feel about it. A quick story, I was explaining to my grandson, who's 11 years old, about one of the scenarios where a father goes off to prison. And I asked him what he thought that would be like. And he asked me two important questions that I hadn't thought about. The first one was, what did he do? And the second one was, what kind of father was he? Was he a loving father who spent a lot of time with the family? He took care of the family and he watched out for the family. He said, if that was the case, he said, I would have a hard time believing he would do anything bad, and I would stay by him all the time. On the other hand, he asked if the father was an abusive father. Did he abuse his wife? Did he abuse the children? Was he a destructive force in the family? And he said, if that was the case, he said, I would say, okay, goodbye. Those things I never thought about. So by taking a look at it with different sets of eyes, you can get a sense on how things are moving forward. So that's the idea of having the scenarios go through there and what our responses might be on those. So we have a series of follow-up questions that you can just walk through. And the other important thing is, if you have someone within your organization, within your parish, who actually has someone who's been incarcerated, or they know a family member in another family who's been incarcerated, see if you can reach out to them so they can give you some firsthand experiences on what that really means.
Great. Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Harry, for your work on session 1 there and sharing about that. So with that, we'll move on to session 2, and we'll be returning to Erica Cohen-Moore to lead us through an overview of what session 2 is.
Thank you. And thank you, Harry and Bill. One of the things I want to say just before we jump into the sessions, we always, and we put this in the facilitator's notes, just to make sure that people know that they can engage or not engage as much as they need to or want to, because this is a sensitive topic for people, and people will be in your groups that have experienced incarceration at some level. So just being sensitive to people's needs. So session 2 is a real focus on Catholic social teaching and integrating the work we do in the prisons, jails, and detention centers with Catholic social teaching. So what this does, what this process allows, is for people to interact in a different way. So in the first session, you're able to break your group up into smaller groups so they can go through case scenarios, which is wonderful. This allows people to, you can break your group up because each one has a lot of detail. So it might be too long to do in one group altogether, but I would encourage you to break your group up into groups of 2 or 3, and then each person gets a Catholic social teaching. And then we have questions that go with each of the teachings, and then bring back, say, you have so many minutes to meet with each other. What do you think? Process through the questions. Bring something new to the group, and then come back as a full group and talk through it. And I think you'll find some wonderful gifts that come out of that discussion and that dialogue. And then also, that would be the Catholic social teaching piece. And then it comes into, again, this is another way to break up the conversation and provide a new way of providing information. And so we did a true false exercise. And again, this exercise can be done really well online or in person. And some of the questions, if you want to show some of them. We just wanted to show you some of the questions that are on there, and some of you have had the opportunity to see these already, but it's a way for people to be exposed to some of these numbers that are pretty profound. And so we really want people to get this information and to hear this information. And sometimes when you do these types of exercises, a true false exercise, it's an easier way for them to get the data versus just reading off slides from a PowerPoint. So it's just a different way to engage people. And so we just encourage you to integrate this exercise somehow into session 2. And then always the reflection questions, you know, how is this exercise for you? Getting feedback from the group. What surprised you? How so? Where are you struggling? Really check in with your group on occasion to make sure they're doing okay. And where are you struggling with this content? For some people, the content will be very, very familiar, and they'll actually be able to add to the conversation. And for some people, this is going to be very, very new, and it's going to be hard to take in. And so just to be with people where they're at in that process. And then how do you connect this information back to Catholic social teaching? And so that's what I've got.
Great. Thank you, Erica.
Mhm.
And Erica's reminding me that within each session, we do have a reflection examine-ish type exercise with each session so that people can check in with themselves and, you know, try to sense where the spirit might be moving in them, where they might be feeling nudged or uncomfortable. Maybe that's a space we need to lean into individually, right? So making sure we provide the space for individual discernment as well as communal discernment. Where can my parish group go with this? Where can I go with this individually? Where am I being called to with this? So that discernment piece is key to each of these sessions as well. All right, so then next up, we'll pass it on over to Daisy Vasquez with Porticus and Karen Clifton with Catholic Prison Ministries Coalition.
Hi, everyone. I'm Daisy, and I am happy to work together with Karen on covering session 3, which is trauma to restoration. This session invites us to have a deeper understanding of restorative justice and practices that focus on acknowledging and repairing the harm and engaging impacted individuals and the community in the healing process. While restorative justice is rooted in Indigenous practices, that really value healing over punishment, I think you'll find that it's very much aligned with what Erica just presented with Catholic social teachings that are focused on human dignity, a just society, and living responsibly. When you think about our faith, it really asks us to hold people accountable, to forgive and to heal, and restorative justice provides us the tools to do just this. In our guide, you're going to find resources that are for helping you to understand and learn more about restorative justice. And it'll be something like the guides of like Catholic Mobilizing Network's engagement guide, Passive Renewed Encounter, which really offers Catholic parishes and ministries and other groups guidance on restorative practices and tools. In session 3, you will see that we encourage you and your group to participate in a restorative practice called circles. To tell you more about it, I'm going to pass it on to Karen.
Thank you, Daisy. This section here is, it really enables you to get an understanding of how restorative justice can be implemented in your faith. But it also has an opportunity to invite people to experience the practice of peacemaking circles or the circle process. And this was a gift to us from the First Nation people. And it's a practice that is going to be utilized here, and it has been utilized in incidences of conflict or where harm has been needs to be resolved. But it's also a wonderful practice that can be carried into our meetings and our organizations, also into our parish gatherings, even our home meetings, to help resolve incidents that take place in the house, or provide an opportunity or means of how to have a conversation. So in this guide, in this section, we're blessed with having at the beginning, CMN gives we have 2 little YouTube videos that give a real quick, succinct explanation of restorative justice. And then Father David Kelly from the Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation does a wonderful short video. We're talking a couple of minutes each, that gives a real good understanding or an explanation of the methodology of creating an intentional, safe space, which allows people to be slow down and to be heard. And we're asking the facilitators, and there's lots of details. These are pages and pages of explanation. So you will go in feeling very comfortable holding these sessions as far as explaining how to set up the circle, how to present this, and how and to enable people that if they've never been in circle before to have a good experience. So in setting it up, it gives you the format, even setting up a centerpiece and what the ambiance of the room should look like. But also it talks about basically a talking piece, which you can use many items as far as for a talking piece. But a talking piece, when we explain this is to ensure that one person has a talking piece, is allowed to speak at a time until they're through. So in this, there's also going to be scenarios that will be presented for the facilitator to choose 7 volunteers within the group and giving them kind of a role play opportunity to have an individual circle where they come to a resolution or discuss what the resolution should be from the scenario. And one of the scenarios is it's a home burglary situation. So it involves a homeowner, a homeowner's friend, a defendant who happens to be 16 years old. So his mother is also in the circle, the chaplain, the defense attorney, and the prosecutor. So they're led through the process, and through this opportunity, you're able to see how through asking the questions and leading them through the circle, the resolution occurs. And so it will be, depending on how large your group is, as far as everyone will be participating, or there'll be some participating with other observers. And then there's an opportunity to reflect and talk about the process, and also pointing out the difference of how we can use restorative justice techniques as a new way of doing our sentencing and incarceration. So there are a couple of, these are the circle debriefing questions, but there's also just wanted you to make sure that you're not feel like you're treading into areas that you're not experienced in. But the little book of circle processes is these are small little booklets. It gives a real good understanding of somebody about the circle process. And as Daisy mentioned, the pathways, these books are free and will be sent to you by Catholic Mobilizing Network on talking about restorative justice. So you have a background understanding of that. So just want to mention that each of these sections can be used individually, or it's a wonderful flow if you're able to gather your group for 3 sessions in a row, but otherwise they can be pulled apart and used individually. And I'm so grateful for Jared's leadership on pulling all of the materials, and as you go through there, you'll see all the different networks and partners materials and pulling this together, because it fulfills our mission to educate Catholics on mass incarceration and the wide rippling effect of mass incarceration. It also is provides an invitation for people to, and presents the need for ministering to all people that have been affected by incarceration. And it invites organizations to bring in representatives to be able to present their information and participate in educating the parish about how people can get involved. So take it over, Maestro. Jared, thank you again for doing this good work.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Daisy, for that overview of session 3. So some of the questions that might come up that you might be thinking of is, well, heck, how do I implement this in my locality? How am I going to involve a local organization in this process? Or how can I invite those organizations or ministers into these sessions? Well, we have a great tool on our website. It's our listings page. And Brandon will be popping that here in the chat in a moment, that you can go onto our website and find an organization that's near you that does work with those who are affected by incarceration. Now, it may very well be the case that when you do your search, something doesn't pop up near you, but maybe you know of an organization that is close by, in which case we would love for you to encourage them, give them the nudge to put a listing on our website. It's free. There's no charge to put the listing up there. And this really is part of CPMC's mission to lift up these ministries and these organizations and connect them, right? So we can get outside of our silos, so we can share best practices and lift up the good work that we're doing to serve those affected by incarceration. This is a little commercial for our listings page. So please check that out and encourage any ministers or organizations you know that might be willing to put their organization up on the website there. So that would be great. Something to keep in mind then, moving forward, is that, you know, this resource is a start. It's not an end. This is something that is meant to get people at the door, you know, get them to step on the threshold of the doorway to step into a larger conversation. So we want to make sure that people are, you know, have those action items or follow-up ways to get engaged, you know, pointing people toward CPMC's website and the stuff that we do, or toward those organizations that you're able to pull into for your local adaptation, to hear from local voices. There are connections that can be made there. And that's how we build church. That's how we become the vision of what church is supposed to be, right? Is when we come together and collaborate and reach out to those who are on the margins, who have been marginalized rather. So that to say that this is a start, not an end. And we hope that this can be a useful tool for you and your locations. Just as this webinar is a start for this resource too. We're not closing the door and saying, all right, good luck, figure it out. This is just an introduction. You know, we'll be popping a survey into the link into the chat feature here in a moment or two to try and garner your feedback on, after you've sat with the packet and the resources for a little bit, to gather from you what you need to help make this a reality in your location. We're not going to be able to respond to all the needs, but we're going to do our darndest to respond to the ones that we can to support you in the best way possible, so that this can be impactful for your community and so that it can be easily implemented in your community as well. And so with that, we're going to move to a brief Q&A session. And I'm actually going to put some poll questions out there. So go ahead and start submitting some questions via the chat. And then you'll see some poll questions pop up from the poll feature. Go ahead and slide an answer into those as best you can now. You don't have to respond if you're unsure of what the answer is at this time. But with that, I'll pass it back over to Father George to kind of lead us through a Q&A session. And we hope to answer some of the questions as best we can today. So thank you all for being here. I look forward to your questions.
Yes, thank you, Jared. And thank you to all of our members who have done such great work in producing this. As Jared mentioned, please put your questions and comments into the chat feature. I would just want to say, as someone who has a foot in kind of both worlds, both prison ministry and as a pastor, there's so much here that you can use in your local parish. And one of the things I intend to do this Lent is introduce this as sort of the theme for our parish over Lent, in terms of restorative justice and educating us about Catholic social teaching and the American prison system, because this really brings to life the heart of what Catholic social teaching is all about. And I think for a lot of us, when we're talking about Lent and preparing for Easter, it's one thing to have sort of an abstract idea of justice. It's another to kind of get into the material like this, which really brings it alive and makes it personal for people. Plus, it opens the opportunities for parishioners to become more involved in jail and prison ministry in their areas. People are often afraid to because they don't know anything about it. This is really a good introduction. So someone said, you may have this on the CMC webpage, and I may have just missed it. We need more volunteers. Every person in prison ministry in every state tells me that. We need a strong, powerful brochure that can be adjusted to each state or diocese. So that's a good point. I think, does anyone want, any of our panelists want to address that question?
Thanks, Father. For one thing, I would note that on our website, we do have a section, webinar on how to recruit volunteers. And there's a tremendous amount of resources that were shared with us by the Diocese of Cleveland, with good ideas, a handbook, all kinds of resources that you might want to check out that will help you as you continue to recruit people.
Great, thanks, Harry. And also somebody wants to know, they say this is, how specifically is this to Lent? It is specific to Lent, but it can also be used any time of year. And it also ties into what someone else asked about encouraging participation and the difficulty of drawing interest from often our parishioners about prison topics, because people are, if they don't have a personal connection to someone who's incarcerated, it can be kind of abstract and a little scary as well. So this material is really valuable in that it draws people into why it's important, why it's part of our gospel mission as Catholic Christians. And I think it gently introduces people to the topic, and that way piques their interest in getting more involved and learning more about prison ministry. Because frankly, I find in my parish, people are open to it, but it's not like on the top of people's lists of priorities, because unfortunately in our country, we're so polarized economically and so many other ways racially, that for a lot of people, they don't really encounter the criminal justice system in their own families or social networks. Other people, they're surrounded by it. So it really depends on your own demographics. But I think to answer the people's questions, this is a good introduction for people. It's a gentle introduction, and it invites people in. It doesn't sort of bludgeon people with facts and figures and ideology. It's really coming from the teaching of the tradition of Catholic social teaching. There are materials about reentry in the community for formerly incarcerated persons, to answer Ed. Again, you can go back to our Catholic Prison Ministry Coalition webinars, and we have had material on this before. If anybody else on the panel wants to add to that.
Yeah, I'll just jump in on that piece real quick there, Father George. Thank you. Ed, I'll just say that in the resource guide, you'll notice that we lift up an organization called One Parish, One Prisoner through Underground Ministries, which is out in Seattle, Washington area. And they have this really fantastic model of how a parish grouping can come together around one person who is being released from incarceration or detention, and can help shepherd them through that reentry process and accompany them through that and provide them the needed support through that. So that's just one model of how that can be done. I also know that, like, for example, St. Vincent de Paul's, they have many chapters throughout the country, right? In many areas where they offer services to help people transition back into their spaces, along with Catholic Charities and many, many like organizations along those lines too. So thank you for that question, Ed.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. And somebody asked, what are the qualifications or characteristics of facilitators? I thought that was a good question. Anybody want to address that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And anybody jump in if you have anything. I think a good facilitator is just a good listener and somebody who can work a room, make sure that everybody's voice is heard. It's always good. We did in the packet, we put down some ground rules for facilitators. So I'd really encourage you to read those, setting up a safe space for everybody. So when you gather the group at the very beginning, really invite people to tell you what the ground rules should be. So one of my big rules always is like share the air. Make sure that everybody has the opportunity to speak if they want to. Make sure everybody can participate. Make sure if people feel uncomfortable at any point of the discussion, or if they don't want to participate, they do not have to. And also allow them the space to leave the room if they need to leave the room. And yeah, it's good facilitators are just people that are willing to be there, who can listen and not to help guide the conversation and not take over the conversation, and just able to allow each participant to participate and feel comfortable. And that's a very, very high 101 overview.
Thanks. Yeah, I think another thing that people can keep in mind here is, especially if you're in a parish situation, you can take parts of this. You don't have to have all of it. And I think, for example, my question has to do with the Stations of the Cross, because in the artwork that Jared mentioned, there's some beautiful illustrations that were done by death row prisoners. And my question would be, how do I extract that and use that in my parish as a Good Friday or a Lenten meditation without necessarily using all the other material right away?
That's a great question, Father George. And I think that something that we are doing in CPMC is focusing on that artwork more and more and lifting up voices in that way. And in the guide, I mentioned there's a pretty exhaustive description, or not exhaustive, but a pretty meaningful description of particularly the Stations of the Cross. And you also find that linked on the Catholic Mobilizing Network website as well, and how those pieces were crafted. And certainly that's some good fodder for some reflection materials for the parishes as well. And you'll be seeing in the coming weeks a launch of a blog on our website called A Look Inside, which is going to preference voices of those affected by incarceration and the artwork that they create, the poetry and the prayers and the written reflections. We'll be launching that here in the next month or so, and you'll be able to continue to see powerful images and pieces like that. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, if I could just quickly jump in for a second, Father George. This is Bill Barber. You talked about the need for volunteers and how we can get them involved a little bit. And I think it goes to also how people can use some of the resources. One of the things that I think I found in the years that I've been invited for this and working on it is that many times we don't realize the incarcerated are people, and we think of them as the crime they've committed or why they are in prison. We don't look at them as someone who committed the crime, someone who's committed that offense, and that's why they're in prison. So I think the more that we can understand that these are people that we're working with, these are our brothers and sisters in Christ, those are the people we're working with. And if we can get people to understand that, then I think you have a better ability to bring volunteers in. And it also gives us a better understanding of what the families might go through. That's one of the reasons we want to do the scenarios, to imagine what the families are going through, imagine what the inmates are going through as well. So I think we have to bring that sense of a human person behind bars, not just the person who, not the crime, but the person who's involved.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And having, done my own doctoral research in criminal justice, statistics you can quote all you want, but what I like about this program is it takes the stats, but it also looks at the stories behind them so that it really humanizes this. And Karen, were you going to add something?
I just wanted to mention that this, we hope that organizations that are on this call also might consider using a section of it or a piece of it is almost as a recruiting tool and an opportunity to invite people in to learn about their organization or to supplement it at the end of one of the sections. And they were talking about a skill set for the facilitator is one, just also making sure that they partner with the parish or the parish social minister or someone for helping for publicity. So don't feel like that they have to do it all. Bring other people in, and most people that work in parishes are delighted to have somebody that will implement a program in Lent, specifically if it's a justice oriented or it's, because it covers so many facets of our ministry. So thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Somebody wants to know if we would involve returning citizens to be actively involved or facilitators of this. And I think it depends on your situation, but absolutely, if it's possible. I mean, I know a lot of guys coming out of San Quentin, and some of them come to our church. And the best people to really address this are people who've had the experience of it. So if you know people in your area who want to share their experiences or be facilitators, you need to do some training with them, but I think they would be a great resource. Another person wants to know what's the experience for the effective group sizes? Any thoughts on that from any of you on what's the optimal size of the group you'd want to be working with?
That's a great question. Our sense is that a good group size would be probably like 10 to 15 people would be an ideal size, I think. Beyond that, it takes a little more of a skillful managerial for a larger group, but that, if you have the volunteer or the time or the bandwidth to do it, running 2 groups, 2 sessions at a time would be awesome. And that's certainly something you can do, but you can flex with that too, feel out with your own community as well, because depending on who's making up the group, you could have a group of 25 people that's going to go really well. or you could have a group of 7 that just doesn't go well at all, right? So that's, that's important on your end of things, is when you're creating lists of people who want to be involved and want to go through these sessions, is gauging those names and the experiences and the wisdom that they bring to these sessions as well is really important. So thank you for that question. We find that the 10 to 15 is a sweet spot, but you're going to know your situation best.
Just wanted to share something real quick. One thing I think that you'll find helpful is if you look at the action sheets for each of the sessions, you'll get different ways and different levels of participation people can have. And I find I have the same problem in my parish, trying to get more people involved. They all say they're interested, but only 2 of us show up. But what we've done is we've tried to encourage the parish to pray for the ministry. That's the least threatening for people. And as they pray for it and we share stories with them of our experiences, it's easier for them to begin to at least think about ways they can support it, even if they can't go in. So look at the action guide for possible ways to engage your parish, at least through prayer. And we also, I love Father George reminding me all the time, you have to remember the staff who work in those sessions. And we send from our parish a weekly message to the staff in our local jail to let them know, 1, we appreciate the work they do. 2, we pray for them every day and their intentions, as well as for those of the prisoners. So that's just another small way we can engage and let them know we are thinking of them and we care for them.
Okay. And somebody wants to know about getting permission to use the PowerPoint for any of the training. So
yeah, so the PowerPoint is on the website that we've shared, and we'll share again here in the link in the chat. You can download that facilitator's PowerPoint and you can adapt it as you see fit for your community. You don't need to worry about any permissions from us on that end of things. I will say that when it comes to the artwork, it is particularly important that we continue to attribute that artwork to the people who created it. So please be mindful of that. That artwork is, it's an expression of someone else experiencing the Spirit moving within them, right? And vocalizing or visualizing how they've been impacted by incarceration. So that's particularly important. But otherwise, the PowerPoint's there for you to download and use with your community as you need to.
Sure. And I'd say for most of the material on our website, that's the case. What we really wanted to do is provide as many resources as you can. So it's not so much about getting permission, it's just using it and adapting it to your particular ministry. I'm glad that Harry mentioned the prison workers and families, because one area, especially when you're dealing with people who haven't had experience with the criminal justice system, they may not feel comfortable with the idea of going into prison or working with offenders or in their minds. But there's a huge area of need in terms of families of prisoners, and then also the prison workers, correction officers, and their families. So there's different ways that people can get involved in this issue without necessarily getting involved with people who are incarcerated because of specific crimes. Somebody said, asking your parish to bake cookies and pray over the cookies for a Kairos prison retreat is a great way to get people involved. And that's a great idea. I think again, you need to be creative in terms of how you introduce ways that people in the parishes can get involved. Because what I find is that I didn't want to do prison ministry at first. I was terrified at the thought of it. But once people get there, once they step inside in some way, and you can do it in very baby steps, once people get sort of a taste for the ministry, I think then they become more courageous and more willing to explore. So again, using this material is kind of, you can break it down and just introduce it a little bit at a time for people, and prepare your parishioners perhaps for engaging in more, developing more prison ministry. Each parish is its own entity, and kind of you have to, it's not a cookie cutter thing. So that, knowing your people and where, what their interests and desires are, you can build from that.
One of the things that we did very intentionally with this packet, and I love the question about the cookies, but is that call to action. We have to be sure that at the end of these conversations, that the conversation doesn't end. And not everybody is called to do ministry inside a facility. People all have different gifts and talents. And that's why we tried to put in discernment prayers into all 3 sessions to really help people guide. Maybe this is just a conversation and a dialogue and a learning experience for them, but maybe it's an opportunity for them to discern what's next. And maybe it's, I remember working with a woman, and she was impacted by the incarceration system because her daughter was hurt. She was a victim of crime. And so this was a family member that was a survivor. And she's like, I want to do something. I need to make an impact. So she made rosaries, and she still makes rosaries and sends them to one of our prisons and spends a lot of money on postage. And that means the world to us that she's doing that. And that's her way to pray for the situation, to continue to pray for her daughter and what happened to her daughter, but also to pray for the person that had an impact in her life and that did that to her daughter. But it's just the way for her to discern next steps and what's her call to action through prayer and what's right. So we really encourage you to look at the call to action, and it's not, it's a fluid list, and please add to things as you think fit in your own neighborhood, in your own parish.
Somebody wanted to know about during COVID. No, I mean, most prisons right now are still have a lot of protocols around people going in and out. So we're not looking necessarily at, if you're talking about that example of doing cookies is for the future. For now, I think we just have to adapt to the ever-changing reality of COVID in our lives. But the thing is, what we could be doing at this point is during Lent, as it's coming up, is preparing our parishioners for the time where eventually we will be able to go back inside.
And also, I'd like to piggyback on what Erica was saying as far as people may not be called to go in for ministry, but if we could help educate Catholics across the board about the issues, advocacy, CPMC is made up of, we have 3 or 4 organizations that are our leading kind of advocates for change within our carceral system. So this is just educating them so that they will be called to action to make legislative moves when possible by contacting their legislators, as simple as that, or writing a letter.
Somebody asks, from your experience, how did we lend clarity and simplicity to a very confusing mission ministry field? That's a great question, because as you can tell from our presentation, you can get overwhelmed by the complexity and size of our criminal justice system and the issues involved. So really, the only way to approach this is just to take one little bit at a time. Find one, even if it's a matter of taking one section of this particular program and using that. So you don't have to do it all at once. It's you just build it a little. It's kind of the way we developed the Catholic Prison Ministry Coalition. I mean, go to our webinars, and you'll see that they address various issues one at a time. Because again, you're totally right. It can be completely overwhelming if you try to look at the big picture. Someone else wants to know, is the process the same within a high school community? I think in terms of educating high school students, this material is wonderful. Often at times, high school students are not really a good group of people to be thinking about taking into prison itself, although we might have to do some work in the juvenile prison setting. But I think kids at that age really don't have the skills that they would need to go into a prison. It wouldn't be a good idea. But that doesn't mean they can't be introduced to the issues, especially around Catholic social teaching. And that way, as they're going on and going to college perhaps and getting involved in further on down their life, they will have a good solid background and an interest developed at that point.
And I'll just interject there on the high school piece, is that each of these sessions is ballparked, depending on how much you adapt it to your local situation, is ballparked to be between an hour and an hour and a half. So if you're on a block schedule at a high school, it's going to slide right in there to be a perfect length for those things. Or you split it up over the course of 2 classes as well for each session, and that would work certainly work well too. So thank you for those questions. We're now going to go ahead and slide into some commercials for what's coming up. Please continue to email us questions about this as it comes up. And we've had the poll questions going on here in the background. We've captured that information. We're going to digest that and look at what we can do to respond to your answers on those, as well as you'll get an email afterward. And once you log off Zoom, you'll also get a page should pop up with a survey form for you to fill out. That you don't need to fill it out right away, because some of you, this may be the first time you're engaging with the resource, in which case you go ahead and sit with it and digest it for a little bit, and then let us know what we can do to help you implement that, because we want to make sure that we hear your voice to make this as applicable as possible. That's the work of the coalition here, right? Working together to make something meaningful happen. So thank you for that. I'm going to go ahead and pop up for our closing commercials here. So coming up here on January 20th, you can join our very own Erica Cohen-Moore, the Executive Director for the National Association of Catholic Chaplains, and Joe Cotton, who's the Director of Pastoral Care and Outreach Ministries at the Archdiocese of Seattle. They're going to lead a session on synodality and what does that look like within the sphere of reentry ministry, but also prison and jail ministry, largely speaking too. So please, Brandon will pop that registration link here in the chat. So go ahead and register for that. We've got that coming up next week, especially if you weren't able to be there for the one we had at the beginning of the month, or if you just want to dig into it a little bit more and you already attended the first one, come on again, you're welcome to come. Then coming up here in February, we have a gathering on human trafficking. So join us for a conversation on how to recognize trafficking within prisons with a newly released population, and how to discuss this topic with people in your ministry. Deborah Monroe, through her personal story and experience, will also guide you as to needs, next steps, and resources. So that link will also be in the chat for you to register for that. And these links are all on our website as well. On our homepage, there's a scrolling feed that will have these links and descriptions available to you. And then how to accompany human trafficking. Join us as Deacon Frank. I am so sorry, I cannot pronounce his last name. Deacon Frank from the Intercommunity Peace and Justice Center will come to speak to us about how dioceses can accompany those affected, those who are being trafficked. So those are some of our upcoming commercial pieces. And we're just going to close with a prayer here. So just take a moment to maybe take a breath. Place yourself to be where your feet are, and Father George, actually Daisy, will lead us in our closing prayer here.
God of healing, we place ourselves in your hands as we ask for compassion and healing. We pray for all who are experiencing conflict in their hearts. May they find restoration. All who are wounded, physically, mentally, and spiritually, that they find the healing needed for peace. All who seek forgiveness, that they receive it. All who feel lost, that they find the light of hope. All who are angry, that the spirit of peace may rest in them. All who feel alone, that they know that we are here with open arms. All who seek the healing of damaged and broken relationships, that they find comfort. All of us who are present here, that you help us accompany those in need. God of restoration, we humbly pray these things to you so that we can walk together in the path of healing and justice. Amen.
Great. Thank you all for being here. We look forward to being with you in the future. And please let us know of your feedback, and we'll see you at the next town hall or webinar.